Welcome back. This is the third part of the screen videos for the Introduction to the Science Education module. And this is where we left off the last time. So I'm moving ahead to another slide. And this is just a simple graph. And it shows what we were just looking at in terms of time. So on the left, we have the Stone Age, technically the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, UPR. And that conservatively began 40,000 years ago. I've heard it placed as far back as 70,000 years, not sure. So I use the conservative estimate. Next to it on the right, you see the agricultural age, which began about 12,000 years ago. Again, the time frame is 10 to 12,000 years. But we can barely see the industrial age and the knowledge age because the time frames are so very different. The industrial age began around 1700. Now, it depends on who you ask about this. I've picked the date that the Newcomen steam engine was invented and first came into use. It was the first practical steam engine. There were others before it. They didn't work very well. There were others after it that worked better. But there's a number of people who place the beginning of the industrial age at 1700 with the Newcomen steam engine. So roughly 300 years ago. And then we have the knowledge age, and it's again very difficult to say when this began. Some people will put it back with the Jacquard loom in the 1800s, but most people tend to pin it around the early 1960s when we began to use computers in business, and we therefore began to see the effects of computers on society. Now, one of the early theorists in this was Marshall McLuhan, and he talked about the cybernated age of the future. And if you go back and read what he wrote at that time, he was very prescient in what he saw and what he said. It's actually very interesting to do. The main point of showing this is, as Ray Kurzweil has said, that key events have been happening at an ever-hastening pace. In other words, things are happening faster and faster. It took a long time to move from the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, Stone Age to the Agricultural Age, less long, but still thousands of years to move from the Agricultural Age to the Industrial Age, not very long at all to move from the Industrial Age to the Knowledge Age, and we're probably already in a new age, because in 2000 we decoded the DNA sequence of human beings for the first time. So we're probably in a biotechnology age, and it's possible we're in one or two others at the same time. It's a very interesting thing to look at the rate at which technology has caused things to change. Okay, we're moving on again to the next slide. And the next slide is one from a report called Working Better. It was done by the Metcalf Foundation, but commissioned by the Ontario government. And it was written by Tom Zizis. And there's two images here. One is the left, and that is the traditional employment pattern of a 1950s firm. And it applied earlier as well as that. On the right, we have the career path for a firm in the 1990s, and that was chosen because the report was written in 2010 and came out in 2011, and you can't actually look at careers unless you look at least a 20-year time frame. So we can't, for example, look at the career in a 2017 firm because you can't have a career in 1 year. So we had to go back that far, at least Zizis had to go back that far. In the 1950s, it was possible to go in at an entry-level position and be promoted within the company up to the top. It didn't happen to everyone, of course, but promotion from within was common. They called it climbing the corporate ladder. The movie, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, is a parody of this. And if you go back and watch that movie, it's quite the time capsule of attitudes and things from the 1950s. The movie came out in the 1960s, but the musical on which it's based was written in the 1950s. Well, moving to the right, which is the important part, and I think more people should be aware of this than are, we have the fragmented career path of a 1990s firm. And we see a couple of common characteristics. In the three bottom levels, especially the entry level, we find things are temporary, part-time, and outsourced to either automated systems or persons in other countries. Likewise, the next level up. And we see a new thing, de-skilling, which means that jobs that previously required a higher skill level are being automated, and the people who are left to do the work the automated systems can't do are being forced down into entry-level jobs, in other words, the lowest pay levels possible. If we move up to the next level, again, we see outsourcing. And then finally we get to a spot where we're in management here, where there's not so much outsourcing, and finally we get to the two top levels. Now, each level requires a different level of education, and you can't move among levels the way you could in the 1950s organization. Instead, you have to more or less leave the company you're working for. In most cases, this isn't true always, but in most cases, leave the company you're working for and move to another company in order to get a promotion. You also have to undergo further education. So we're looking at lifelong learning here. And there's always the danger of being outsourced. And I've found that a lot of young people, including some of my former students, are on part-time or temporary contracts for a number of years before they get full-time employment. It's a situation that is only beginning to be publicized. We haven't heard much about it until the past couple of years. And even then, we're still not hearing as much as we should. So this is the career path of the 1990s, and I don't see it changing very much, except getting worse in terms of de-skilling and outsourcing for our students who are coming into school in the next year or so. So how things are going. Categories of jobs, there's knowledge work jobs, and these require a degree or diploma, and I'm going to add apprenticeships. Then there's middle level jobs. Those require experience, but not necessarily a degree or a diploma. A lot of these middle level jobs used to be factory work, where people learned how to use certain machines or work at certain workstations and were therefore more valuable than people with entry-level positions. And then entry-level jobs, which are no longer really entry-level jobs. They're permanent jobs, except that they pay very poorly and will never pay better. Now, the middle-level jobs have been in decline since the 1990s, and we have what's called the hourglass economy. And the next slide is going to show that, and the important thing to realize about this slide is that it is 2006 data. So these are not data from the current period. They're over 10 years old at this point. So I can tell you that the middle area here, the middle jobs, has shrunk quite a bit. But so has the upper level, because artificial intelligences and automated systems have been making incursions into knowledge jobs. It turns out that there's a large routine portion to even the most advanced knowledge level jobs. And anything that can be reduced to a routine can be done by a machine. And that's what's happening. So moving on to the next slide, we see a report from the Toronto Star. And the report says how important education is. So even though jobs in certain areas are going away, the jobs that are remaining are being taken by people with better educations. And that underscores the importance of education in the modern world. So it says go beyond high school or face big trouble. We've known this for 30 years, but it's gotten worse. Moving on. This is from a book by Friedman and Mandelbaum called That Used to Be Us. And it says more or less what I've just said. All the rote jobs are gone. But look at the skills they talk about. You have to have people who can think, interact, and collaborate. And you'll notice that in your courses here, this kind of thing has been strongly emphasized. As I say, we've known for 30 years this is going on, and we've made a push to change how we educate because of it. Pay attention to it because that's really important. It's, in fact, critical. As I said earlier, I like cartoons, and I like this one a lot. It shows the incursion of automated systems into office life. Just have a look at it. I like the look on the secretary's face when she realizes that she is in fact now redundant, but hasn't yet been fired. Here's another one. This is not what you want to hear from your employer. Okay, so where are we? People have been paying attention to this, and people have been saying what I've been saying, except that I can say I've been saying it a little longer than most. Anyway, these are the priorities from the World Economic Forum, January of 2017, so very up to date. They talk about the fourth industrial revolution. That's what I call the knowledge age, where we're talking about the same thing. They're talking about restoring global economic growth, but they're not very clear how that's going to happen. They're talking about reforming market capitalism, but they're not talking about how that's going to happen either. They also talk about a few other things there, but the reforming market capitalism, they're talking about income redistribution because they're looking at people at the lower end of the scale and saying this is socially unstable, it's going to cause problems. And they're looking forward to the point when people will start losing their jobs and they won't even have entry-level jobs to go to. So they're taking this very seriously. And they make a statement about youth unemployment. And again, this was this year. So even without today's technologically driven structural unemployment, notice the use of the term structural unemployment. That's another way of saying permanent unemployment. The global economy would have to create billions of jobs to accommodate a growing population. Skipping ahead, thus, 2017 will be a year in which social inclusion and youth unemployment becomes critical global and national issues. And that's something that we have to really think about. I think it's terribly important to realize that this is going on, and it's what's going to be going on, because it's going to put pressure on teachers. People want teachers to solve a lot of their problems. And here's an example in practice, and again, it's a recent example. I'm trying to keep this presentation up to date, even though I've been using it for a while. This is from 2016, and it shows that the Bank of Montreal is laying off over 1,800 people, but is raising its dividend. In other words, it's making more money, but needs fewer people to do it, and so it's laying people off. And why is it doing that? Because consumers are shifting to banking online, and because there are other technological improvements that have increased the efficiency of bank operations. So those jobs are going away. Moving ahead, this is a graph I created of Moore's Law. I created it from the period 2000 to 2025. I could have stretched it out to 2050 as some do, but I don't trust predictions that far ahead. But on 10-year time frames, and I made this in 2015, 10-year time frames were pretty good. There's actually two graphs here. There's a blue line that shows what would happen if the power of computer chips increased 100-fold each year. The red line shows what's actually happening, which is an exponential curve called Moore's Law, named after Gerald Moore, who worked for Intel. He was the CEO, and he pointed out that every 18 months, the power of computers doubled, and that this was going to keep on going, and if it kept on going, we'd get an exponential curve of the kind you see here. Okay, so what's the point of this? Moore's Law is a pretty good proxy for other technologies. In other words, as computer chips get more advanced, other technologies get more advanced. There's a synergy that goes on here, and we get a lot of developments happening quickly. And we're now on the elbow of this exponential curve. And it's predicted that by 2020, computer chips will have the power of the human brain. In other words, the number of processors on a computer will be roughly equal to the number of neurons in a human brain. By 2025, it'll be much larger. So we're going to be dealing with machines that will be very small and very, very powerful. And this is going to change a lot of things. Now, some people will tell you that Moore's Law can't go on forever, which is perfectly true, and that we needn't pay much attention to it. All I'm pointing out here is that over a 10-year time frame, we're going to see massive changes. And 10 years isn't that far away. Moving on. Robots. I pay attention to robotics partly because my eldest son is a roboticist. He designs control systems for satellites and surgical robots and the Canadarm manipulator arm and things like that. And when he started to get interested, when he was a teenager, I started to get interested. So I've been paying attention to this for some time. So Brynjolfsson and McAfee wrote a report. Actually, they wrote a book called Race Against the Machine. And it was so popular, they self-published it, and it became so popular they were asked to expand it. So they wrote another book in 2014 called The Second Machine Age. And it's very good. It's well worth reading. And I'm going to read and interpret what this says here. You're not really supposed to read your slides, but occasionally I will break down and do that. Technological progress is going to leave behind some people, perhaps a lot of people, as it races ahead. You hear this often expressed as winners and losers. I don't like that term. I really don't like it. But what they mean is there are going to be employed people and unemployed people. And that's perhaps even a lot of people. And as we'll demonstrate, there's never been a better time to be a worker with special skills or the right education, because these people can use technology to create and capture value. We're going to more or less have to make sure as many of our students as we can have special skills, because routine skills are valueless. However, there's never been a worse time to be a worker with only ordinary skills, in other words, what I just said, and abilities to offer, because computers, robots, and other digital technologies are acquiring these skills and abilities at an extraordinary rate. That's my emphasis, but they're quite correct. So moving ahead, I'm going to talk about this briefly, but this is a clickable slide, and if you can't get it to work for you, you'll notice there's a URL at the bottom of the slide. You can copy that and paste it, and it will take you to a YouTube video by the History Channel. It was made back in 2011, which means it's obsolete, and the little robots they're showing here can do much more now than they could then. And what you're seeing in this picture is part of Amazon's warehouse. And the racks you see on the left and on the right, with the worker in the center, are carried around by the little red robots underneath. And the boxes you see on the racks constitute orders that have been assembled by robots. And Tim, the human pick worker, picks up items from those boxes, scans them twice, and then puts them in another box for shipping. And that's all he does, all day long. This is an entry-level job. And Tim's job used to be done by people who worked in the warehouse, moved around, had to know where things were in that. Now he just stays stationary, picks something up, scans it twice, and puts it in a box. Tim's job is not going to be there very long. The real problem here is that we don't have robotic hands that are very good yet. We are working on that. Amazon has issued a $10 million challenge to produce good robotic grippers, which is the robotics term for hands. So I'm going to stop the video here for right now. This is the end of it for today, or rather for this section. And what I want you to do, your assignment, is to watch that video. And then we'll pick it up in another segment. So I'm signing off now. Thank you for listening, and watch this video because it's actually quite important to see.